This is Rob Tebbutt for Boxing Social in association with Betfred. Delighted, as always, to be joined by Shane McGuigan. We are down here at the University of Kent. It's very, very hot, as always, apparently. How you doing, Shane? Nice to see you.
Thanks for coming down, mate. Yeah, it's roasting. We're in like an old converted squash court, so it's not a lot of ventilation. We've got heaters, but that's not much use in this sort of temperature. Just wrapping up the training for CBS and Fowler. We've got counting down the days now, about 8 days to go, I think it is, or 9 days. Everyone's looking sharp, everyone's looking well, and looking forward to rolling it all in.
Now, as ever, your gym is expanding. We'll come on to talk about that and the kind of the wider McGuigan's gym later. But let's start with the two guys, as you mentioned, who are going to be out in the ring next week. Let's start with Chris Billam-Smith. Just caught up with him there. Seems very relaxed ahead of his British, Commonwealth and European title fight with Tommy McCarthy next week.
Yeah, he's in a really good space. His weight's really good. He sparred really well. I think he's mad up for this fight. He knows what the opportunities can come off the back. Tommy's well ranked in the governing bodies on the world scene as well. So, this is a perfect fight. It's a perfect opportunity. There's lots at stake in terms of financially after this fight as well. But there's also lots of belts on the line. There's some great opportunities ahead, and he has to come through and look good against Tommy McCarthy. And I think it's not going to be an easy fight. It'll be quite fiddly and quite tricky early on, but I think he'll get to him, and I think his size and stature and sort of presence in the ring will be too much for Tommy.
Where does this rank compared to your Richard Riakpor's? Obviously, they've not boxed. Lawrence, etc. Lawrence is past domestic level now, world champion, of course. Where does Tommy McCarthy rank compared to Chris's other opponents, and how difficult of a fight is this compared to the other fights Chris has had in his career?
I think it's not as hard of a fight as the Richard Riakpor fight. Just simply because he's not got the size, he's not got the stature, he doesn't punch as hard, but he's more skillful. So he's got good fast hands, good combinations. But so I'd say it's a place below Riakpor, but I think it's above the Craig Glovers and Nathan Fawleys and all the other guys, the Ducars of this world. He won't be as physically tough as someone like Ducar, but he'll have a good mix of everything. Skill, bit of power, bit of speed. So it's going to be a tricky night, but it's one that I wouldn't have taken if I wasn't really, really, really confident that Chris is going to come through and look the part doing so. You
mentioned the Vasyl Ducar fight. Obviously, going into that fight, not a lot of people outside of kind of the inner hub of boxing really knew what a tough fight that was. Yeah. Considering everybody's careers have been put on hold due to COVID, how beneficial is it for Chris to get those, or to have had those 10 hard rounds with Ducar under his belt ahead of this fight?
I think it's massively beneficial for him because, apart from Riakpor and another guy that he boxed, I mean, he's just flew through everyone and knocked them out. So it's good for him to know that he has to pace himself over the distance. Do you know what I mean? Even though it was over 10 rounds, he could have done another 2. But it's about being consistent within the rounds and then not giving rounds away. And I think the only rounds that Ducar won were the rounds when Chris sort of gave them away. Do you know what I mean? He switched off and let him start his combinations, and that's something when you get up to the top level you can't do. You've got to be consistent throughout the rounds, throughout all 3 minutes, win them, and if you are going to take a breather, you've got to take a breather and be switched on and not get caught with silly shots and keep moving your head. So it's a very beneficial fight for us to go into the McCarthy fight. I think it's a lot more beneficial than his fight. He had Bilal Agul, whatever his name is, I think, when he won the title, and then he had that easy touch afterwards where he stopped him in 5 rounds, and they're not the ones that's going to get you up for Chris Billam-Smith.
We've spoken in the past about obviously taking Josh Taylor all the way through, Carl Frampton, even when you started off with Lee McGregor. These are guys who have come out of the amateurs with a lot of acclaim, a lot of kind of, I don't want to use the word hype, but they're seasoned guys. I mentioned this to Chris earlier, the fact that he didn't come out of the amateurs with that. He wasn't somebody who everybody was kind of waiting to turn over, with all due respect to him. With that being said, winning the British, Commonwealth and European title, where would that rank for you achievement-wise for developing of fighters with Chris Billam-Smith?
Massively so. I think Chris is going to fight for a world title. If you'd have said that when he was coming to me after 43 amateurs and 31 of them wins, do you know what I mean? He just hadn't he hadn't tapped into what he was capable of. And it's a credit to myself, yes, as a coach, but massively to him as an athlete, to be able to, like, digest the information, put it into practice, have the brains to be able to understand where he should be, know when to go, know when to not go, you know what I mean? Like, maximize himself as an athlete, being disciplined throughout the time. Boxing is like, in the amateurs you can fake 3 minutes. With talent you can just fake 3 minutes, but you can't fake 36 minutes. And hard work will always overcome when it comes down to discipline. And the pros is basically, it's the truth. Do you know what I mean? It's gonna separate the talented from the guys that are disciplined. And that's something that I've always had a lot of talented kids come to the gym, but I've always been able to instill the discipline within them. And and they don't like it sometimes, and they might have fucked off, and they might have said, "Oh, it's too hard in there." But at the end of the day, it's about being grounded, and there's no egos within this gym, and we're trying to become as good as possible. Like me as a coach, those guys as fighters, and that's why I think Chris has just been flew through the division. Do you know what I mean? Or flew through all of his fights, and gradually got better year in, year out. I mean, we were thinking about it the other day. He's here 4 years. You know what I mean? He's here over 4 years now. So, but the lad that came down to spar, Chris came down to spar George Groves on New Year's Day in like 2016. Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable because he was struggling to get through four rounds with George, and now he's, do you know what I mean? He's really improved.
Well, they could arrange another spar. I saw George the other week. I think maybe George will have to come down to cruiserweight for that one, but yeah, it'd be an interesting one. Moving on, Anthony Fowler. Again, fights Roberto Garcia, same card, same night. He's called for these domestic names over the last 18 months or so. You've ended up on Roberto Garcia. We've seen him before against Liam Smith, Martin Murray. Does Anthony Fowler have to look good in this fight? Is this a fight that he has to make a statement in? Definitely.
He has to make a statement. But it's a guy that was willing to take the fight, and like Eddie wanted to get an opponent announced before he launched the DAZN, remember that launch of DAZN, the UK launch at the Matchroom HQ, and I said, look, we need credible rounds. We need a hard test. We don't want to just have another, even though Jorge Fortea could have been a real slippery night's work. If you'd have put Jorge Fortea in against someone like Ted Cheeseman, it would have been a tough night for Cheeseman. But because Fowler possesses so much power, like sometimes he doesn't get the rounds in that he needs. And yes, it's one thing doing it in the gym, but it's about doing it under the lights, not switching off, not getting caught with silly shots. Because it's just about flying through these next, you know what I mean? Like flying through this guy, but then also just stepping up, because Cheeseman doesn't want to box him. JJ Metcalf got offered the fight. He asked for just ridiculous money, and maybe it's the fact that everyone knows there's more money in the DAZN cards, but at the same time, you've got to be reasonable. And Sam Megginson pulled out the purse bids. It's like they clearly understand the threats of Anthony Fowler, and it's not saying that they're cowards or anything. It's just, I think they realise that there's easier fights out there. You know what I mean? And it's just down to Eddie to deliver now. You know what I mean? We're having conversations all the time. These are the fights that we want, and I think we'll have a big fight after this one. Do you know what I mean? And well, hopefully we do.
Obviously, the Hamza Shiraz fight was ordered by the board, both different sides of the street, to borrow a term from our American colleagues. Is that realistic? Can we ever realistically expect to see that?
Well, and it's 30 years of age. Like, we can't be having being ordered for an eliminator and then it being pulled out, and then we're going into another bids for another eliminator, and then it'll have a window of like 4 or 5 months to get organised. It's like, we need to get cracking. Do you know what I mean? And I'm sentimental about the British title, but you don't necessarily need it. Josh Taylor, when we had him, he didn't. Jack Catterall had the British title. We didn't box him. We couldn't get the fight made, so we just moved on. With Frampton, we had Scott Quigg. He had the British title, and in the end, they ended up boxing for about 15 times the money at world level. So, but he didn't win that British title, and he moved on, boxed for the European and Commonwealth. And there's other routes that you can take, but it's been a bit of a, because of the changing coaches, and obviously I'm managing, looking after Fowler as well now. It's like he's getting better, and I think, you know, we just need to take the step up now. And I think he's more than ready. We've had our easy tests, and this is going to be a hard fight against Roberto Garcia. For Antonio Margarito, he's been around a hell of a long time. You know, went 12 with Martin Murray, went 10 with Billam-Smith. Like, if we can stop him, it's a huge statement. But if we can't stop him and we get 10 hard rounds in, you know what I mean, and he has to dig in a bit, then that's exactly what he needs at this stage of his career, because he's gonna get tested at some stage. You know what I mean, he's got tested against Fitzgerald, and he was with Dave, and he had a bad night, and you know, whatever the case was there. But that's the only time he's really been tested. So he needs to be consistently stepped up, small step ups, because he's got the ability to really crack on. And I honestly don't think, you know, I don't think he's far off from world level. You know, I think we need to have this one, and then have like Sherratt versus Loranja is in September, I think, for the European. I think we could either fight one of those guys if Cheeseman doesn't want it. You know, there's options out there, but you know, we just want to step up now and get a solid name and get some form of like belts and then world rankings. And as I said, he's 30. We need to be fighting for titles soon. Like, and I'm not talking about British, European. I'm talking about we need to be getting onto that world scene soon. People might say, oh, you know, Fowler's not going to fight for a world title, but trust me, he will, and I think he'll win a world title. And you know, I think the guy that I'm seeing in the gym all the time he's going to win a world title.
I was going to come on to that. Obviously, he's been with you about 18 months now, 2 years, probably getting on around then.
February 2019, wasn't it?
Yeah, so 18.
Sorry.
No,
January 2019.
January 2019.
Yeah.
So yeah, Jesus, the time has really flown. One of the first things you said, you wanted to quicken him up. You wanted to make him a little bit lighter on his feet. How has that been going, really? Obviously, we've only seen him for a couple of rounds against Jorge Fortea. He had the Adam Harper fight at Fight Camp before then, as you mentioned there. Outside of the Scott Fitzgerald fight, he's not really had the chance to showcase what I'm sure you've been working on in the gym without obviously over-divulging too much. How's he been getting on, and what have you been impressed with improvements-wise?
Just his reaction. Sometimes he's a bit slow with his legs, and he's sort of set to punch, and that's why people, when they sort of step back, he sort of doesn't track in as quick. But now he's tracking his legs in faster. I think you saw that in the Fortea fight. He wasn't just single shot. He was jab, hook, bang. He was like springing the attacks, and then also he loves it when guys walk onto him because he can set his feet and punch with them. But it's also about making sure that he's not punching with them every time. He's changing it up, and he's just creating more ring generalship. And I think you get that from more quality of sparring in a quiet gym when there's no heckling and there's no music and shite. Do you know what I mean? We're in here and he's listening to instructions, and it's just like step, move, come in, come out, don't be there, tie them up. Because once he freestyles, he loses the plot. Once he freestyles, you know what I mean? He just goes, sees red and tries to punch and knock people out. And it's like, you can't do that at the top level. You're too readable. You've got to be really clever. You've got to find ways to shut people's attacks down as well, just dropping the hand out, changing the angle. All these things can be taught, and if you just do it repetition, even when they're in there under the lights and they get, you know, and they're seeing red in terms of like, they're still just nailed in those patterns. They're still just synced into those rhythms, and I think that's what I'm seeing a lot of. But yeah, it's, you know, his footwork's definitely really improved.
Before we move on, we've spoken about kind of world level at 154 pounds this past weekend was the undisputed fight, Jermell Charlo versus Brian Castano. Did you watch it? Have you caught up with it since?
I've seen the highlights. I haven't seen the full fight. But apparently my dad watched it and Fowler watched it, and I will watch it, but I haven't managed to get around to it. But apparently, you know, Charlo got outworked, but landed the cleaner, harder shots. Interesting to see if the governing bodies allow that rematch to be sanctioned, and if they don't, if something comes vacant, or if they do, if Charlo was probably more likely to adjust because he did it against Harrison, isn't it Harrison?
I knew you wouldn't have watched it. I don't know why I bothered even asking. Anyway, moving on. We'll start Yeah, we'll start with Luke Campbell. Still waiting to hear what's happening with Luke. Last time I caught up with you, you said that he's now coming back to the gym. He's interested to return to the ring. Any update, any idea of when that could potentially be?
So Luke and I have had a few discussions, and I think he's still considering his next move. I think he's going to have to make a decision pretty soon because he's been out of the gym quite a long time. He's got a lot of businesses, he's got a lot of property, he's doing well for himself, he's got this new gym set up. I think there's still a little underlying factor in him that wants to continue to box, but he's just putting off any form of decisions and stuff. He come down for a little bit, but he's got a young kid, and I was going to get him on the Josh Warrington Lara undercard. He had a slot in there, but it didn't fit for him in his schedule. So we're gonna continue to. I'll ring him in a bit, and we'll continue to address that. But for now, I think he's staying at home and he's just enjoying his family time.
Okay, moving on. Lawrence Okolie. Last we heard, obviously we're waiting for an announcement. Why don't you tell me what's going on with Lawrence Okolie before I say anything that I potentially shouldn't? When could we expect to see him back in the ring? Obviously, we're still waiting to hear about a date for him to defend against his mandatory challenger. What can you tell me about
that? So he's got Prasovic. Dylan Prasovic is his name. So annoyingly, this guy won't take step-aside money, so we're having to fight him. It's not like it's a bad fight or anything. It's just still going to continue the momentum. He's an unbeaten guy. I think he's only about 15 fights or something like that. We were going to go out in America on the August the 21st show. That show got pushed back a week. And now that show might be pushed back until September the 16th. So, because Canelo is probably going to be boxing then. So from then, we decided that we would most likely wait until we can get him on the AJ card. So we're still in talks at the moment. I think 258 are still discussing things, but most likely he will be on the September the 25th at Tottenham.
And you just mentioned there about his mandatory not taking step aside. So I'm assuming that was to make a unification bout.
Yeah. I mean, look, Lawrence has always showed that he's up for taking the steps, and he wants to get compensated because of that. And that's why he took the Matty Yaskins fight. That's why he took the Isaac Chamberlain fight early on. Both of them did. He wants to sort of make statements. He wants to do things after 17 fights. Is it 17? I think 16 or 17 fights. He's world champion now. So he wants to do it in double quick time, and I don't blame him. He's more than capable of beating everybody in the division, and that's including Bradis. I really believe it. So we just we want the unification fights. We want the big fights. We want the sort of headliners. He wants the ability to headline shows and get the eyeballs on him, not on other people. He is the attraction now because he's a world champion. There's not many world champions in the DAZN channel. You've got AJ and you've got him, and obviously the females, but there's not many other male ones apart. Obviously, they were talking about from the UK stable. So, do you know any other British? You got Josh Taylor, but you got Sonny Edwards in it.
The winner of Galahad Dickens.
You got the winner of that. But then you've got Lawrence Okolie, you've got Anthony Joshua, and obviously you've got Tyson Fury, but he's on the other side as well. So from the DAZN's side of things, do you know what I mean? Lawrence is a big draw, where he should be a big draw.
How long has he got left at cruiserweight, Shane? It seems like it's been a question that I've asked you a lot over the last couple of years. He looked fantastic in his last fight. Is it a case of getting those big fights in at cruiserweight or moving up? Or do you think there's time to kind of get all of those done at cruiserweight before moving up to heavyweight, or do you think he might not?
Undisputed. I think he's got another year and a half. But hopefully we'll get the undisputed before a year and a half. Eddie's, got to deliver those. And we would love the guys like Bradis, but I know he's got plans of moving up. But I think we could entice him down. He's not a huge cruiser. I think he walks around at 15.5 stone, maybe 16 stone. Like if he really dedicated himself and put a shift in, it would easily be able to get down to that weight again. So yeah, it's just about getting the big fights here, because what we're going to do up at heavyweight, it's not a lot up there. You know, there's AJ up there who's got 3 of the belts, and then you got Fury that's got another. Hopefully for all boxing fans, those two get that fight on, and that will be probably 2 fights. If it's controversial, it might even be 3. You got Usyk as well, who's lingering around. He wants his shot. You got Joe Joyce. You got Daniel Dubois, who I train as well. That after a few fights, he might be on the cusp of a world title. So there's a lot of traffic up there. Is the right word for it. And why don't we just do as much as we can down here? You know, with this TV deal, there should be good money in it. There should be good money in recognition. You know, there's never really been amazing money. There was more money in the WBSS at super middleweight than there was at cruiserweight. Considerably more money. You know, so why is that the case? Why don't we glorify the cruiserweight division? Because once it starts, I think it's a perfect blend. It's a perfect blend of speedy, big punches. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like super middleweight always seems to have a lot of attraction. The middleweights does too, and then the heavyweights does. But there's sometimes the light heavy goes a bit miss, and sometimes cruisers goes a bit miss. But it's just that's down to the advertisement, the media getting the narrative on the fighter, because there's a lot of narrative behind Lawrence Okolie. He worked at McDonald's. He's had a different life, you know, different upbringing to the normal kids that have just been groomed to be champions from the 8 years of age. He started boxing late. He did it. He winged it, and he went to the Olympics after so little fights and turned pro. He got booed for a lot of his pro fights, and now the script's changing, and we should push the script changing, not reflect. Don't look back, forward. Look at what he did in his last fight. Let's get this guy out of the way. Let's knock this guy out, and then let's see what he's like against McCarthy, against the winner of Egorov versus Gulamarian, or against Bradis. You know, let's get these huge fights, and let's get a massive build-up, do 24/7 shows, and really pump it. Because if you actually start watching what Lawrence Okolie is behind the camera, he's a great personality. He's entertainment. I sit there and laugh at him, you know, with him and at him sometimes. Do you know what I mean? But either way, it's funny.
As far as his boxing ability and as a fighter, obviously his last fight was by far and away his standout performance against Krzysztof Kravatsky. How much more has he still got to do, really? You mentioned the fact that he came to the sport late. He's taken on these challenges throughout his short professional career. He's world champion. How much more has he still got to improve on?
Loads. But you need the right partner. You need the right dance partner to bring those out of him. You know, like, I knew once he got up to world level, they weren't just going to maul him. You know, because what benefit is they can't get their shots if they're exhausting themselves, tying them up all the time. So, you know, the Ngabus of this world, he's not really going to get to world level. But he's a hard man, and he's a real hard physical fight for anybody at world level or even below it. But he won't necessarily win them. You know, Bradis isn't just going to walk him down and start pushing him and tying him up. He's going to use his feet to transition from long to short. And when people try and do it clean and clever, that's when they're going to get knocked out by Lawrence, because he'll walk them onto shots. And he also needs to be tested from a boxing standpoint, because it's easy for him. He got out that world title fight against Glavotsky and was like, didn't you hit once? Like, you know, that's a former world champion. He literally never got hit once. So, you know, we want to test him, we want to push him on, and I think there's still loads for him to really improve on from a technical aspect and from because you learn in the gym every day on the pads, you learn in like little bits in sparring, but you learn a lot in fights. Oh, I got buzzed there, I need to tie him up, I need to do this. And that's what makes fighters complete fighters. You know what I mean? That's what makes Canelo the fighter he is now to the Canelo that was even before Mayweather, not just Mayweather, way before him, when he boxed Cotto's brother and got wobbled. Do you know what I mean? Like, you develop in the ring.
Before we move on and talk about Daniel Dubois, you mentioned the sparring then. One of the things that people ask me a lot about when we kind of talk about Daniel Dubois, is how often Lawrence and Daniel spar together now they're in-house. Obviously, I knew that they sparred beforehand. Yeah. What's that situation like now? Obviously, you've got Chris Billam-Smith as well, who's around the same weight, or cruiserweight as long with Lawrence. How do you manage that? How does that differ now that you've got them in-house as opposed to beforehand when Daniel was coming here for sparring?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a massive fan of like school sparring and condition sparring, but you know, we do lots of drill, like we do lots of drill work on the pads and stuff, and then when we spar, I would say, Lawrence, I want you to work on movement. Dan, I want you to sort of press forward. But there hasn't been that much sparring of late since Dan's fight, and there was 4 spars before the fight, I think, when Lawrence jumped in, and Chris jumped in, did some rounds with Dan as well. So over the years, we will use everyone to sort of jump in and spar each other. You know, but I don't want people knocking lumps out of each other. Do you know what I mean? I don't want people trying to knock each other out, and I just don't want to get it to that. And that's why we bring sparring partners in, so you can do the light technical work together. Yeah, and still go through the motions. It doesn't have to be like, you know, you're boxing to orders. But you're just not trying to kill each other. And then, you know, when the camp really gets knuckled down, then it's nice to bring in other opposition, you know, whether we fly them in from abroad or whether we get them, you know, from other gyms.
Picking it straight up there, leads us in nicely to Daniel Dubois. Of course, you've had one fight together. You've worked more with him since his fight than you did before his fight, certainly in the build-up to it. How are things? How's he been looking in the gym since you got back in there against Bogdan Dino? There we go. Yeah,
it was a quick camp for that one, but obviously he was training with Jimmy Tibbs before that because Mark was away with Billy Joe Saunders. So yeah, it's been good. It's been good since the fight to be able to, you know, sort of work on some things, not have a date that we have to get prepared for and stuff like that. We don't have to like worry about his fitness. We can slow the sessions down and work a bit more technically. So he's been doing 4 sessions to 5 sessions a week since the fight. Well, he had a week off, so yeah, he's doing a lot of sessions, and hopefully we'll have a date end of August for him. And you know, it's great. We want to keep the momentum. You know, he needs gradual step ups, Dan, because he went from fighting guys that he was more than capable of knocking out to fighting Joyce. But Bogdan Dino was actually it was just people might say, oh, it's a Romanian taxi driver. He wasn't. He was a decent test. You know, he took Pulev 7 rounds and he went 4 rounds with Gerald Miller when Gerald Miller was taking copious amounts of stuff. You know.
He certainly was. Allegedly. Well, I don't know. However. Anyway, one of the things that came out from the Dubois fight was everybody kind of commented on his relief and how happy he looked after getting the win. Did you sense that afterwards? Obviously, the Joyce was a very high-profile defeat very early in his career. He looked like the weight of the world had been lifted off his shoulders getting that knockout win over Dino.
Yeah, but also I think, you know, he's in a good place as well. Like, you know, he's happy in the setup in the gym. He enjoys being around the lads. He got the knockout. He obviously understands how much time and effort he's invested since being a kid, how much his dad's invested in terms of driving him around to gyms and making sure that, yeah, he gets the adequate sparring, being up in Sheffield, you know what I mean, for those years. Like, that is time invested. And if you have a loss, most times when you have a loss, you're right back to square one again. And the fact that he's just been catapulted up because he's boxed for the WBA interim title, it is huge relief. And it wasn't an easy test. They could have given him a lot easier oppositions. I know it proved to be quite an easy fight, but you know, after a loss like that, sometimes you think, "I'll rebuild and reasonably easy." But from now on, we need gradual step ups, and we want to fight either Trevor Bryan or something. You know what I mean, or keep making sure that we're getting highly ranked. You know, because there's a lot of stuff going on at the top end, and to keep the more governing bodies have belts elsewhere, the more money there is for the fights. You know what I mean? For the governing bodies and for the promoters and stuff, because there's more chance to make super fights.
If Dubois does get the opportunity to box Trevor Bryan and wins, he would then become, on paper at least, mandatory challenger for Anthony Joshua. Of course, we know it's not as easy as that. It's not as simple as just becoming the mandatory and then getting the mandatory shot. There's, as you mentioned earlier, AJ Fury, potential for a 2-fight deal at least there. But when do you think realistically he'll be ready to to move up to, I don't want to say that elite level, but certainly the legitimate world-class level where he's starting to box guys who are top 10 in the world, top 15 in the world?
I think we're 2 fights away from boxing the top 10s, really. I mean, maybe 1 or 2 fights away because, and I don't, Trevor Bryan is he's only a top 10. It's not like he's a crazy good fighter. Do you know what I mean? Andy Ruiz, you got Dylan White. These guys are all decent quality top 10 fighters. Do you know what I mean? But even the Derek Chisoras of this world, he's had a few losses, but he's still a really tough fight. So we need fights that are names, but also, even Joseph Parker. Let's get these guys. Let's get these big fights made. Maybe not after this one, or maybe we have one more and then we go straight into that sort of caliber, because they're still highly interesting fights from fans and also very good learning fights for us.
You don't like a kind of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for here. Obviously, nobody is going to say that they like a soft touch, but you really don't like wasting time with fights and fighters, do you?
I don't. No, not at all. No. I really don't, because it's not what I'm in here for. I don't want to just get fights and build their record up against plums. Do you know what I mean? It's not reality. Like, we live in a fake world with this Instagram and all this bollocks, right? These people doing all these little head movement clips. It's like, well, you're doing it against guys that can't even they wouldn't be able to get a license. Like, fight real people. Do you know what I mean? Let's see what people are like. Look at Josh Taylor. Look what we did. We believed he could beat O'Hara Davies. Eddie believed O'Hara Davies could beat Josh Taylor. We made the fight. It's great for them. Like, you need these assets. In America, they after about 7 or 8 fights, like Raymond Ford, they give him an acid test. They give him another unbeaten guy. So that's what boxers should be doing. You should be getting these tests and then trying to win world titles as fast as possible. Both my brothers were at the WBO convention, and a representative from Lomachenko went there and asked for Lomachenko to fight for a world title in his debut. And who's the guy? He was the former Olympian. He goes, what is this? Like, this is crazy. Who can fight? How can we sanction this fight? And then they basically had a vote. They were like, all right, let's go around the room and have a vote. Because they were like, he's the best amateur that's ever been. He's phenomenal. You should sanction it. And then they basically voted that he could fight for an interim first, and then he could fight for the world title second. But that showed, like, Lomachenko's, when he went to all the different promoters, that's why he settled with Top Rank. He said, I want to fight. Can you make me a world title fight in my debut? No. Okay, next one. Can you? No. Maybe. You know what I mean? And that's how he found Top Rank. Because they were the people that were like, we'd probably do that. You know what I mean? And that's the mentality you should have, especially being an Olympian. You know what I mean? Coming out of the Olympics, like Taylor went to the Olympics, all these guys that I tend to get that sort of come from high-end amateurs. Like, there's no point going back to fighting guys for 15, 20 fights. Do you know what I mean? Unless you turn pro with like 10 amateurs, then build it up slow. But what's the point in these easy touches? Like Anthony Yarde having all those easy touch after easy touch. Like, you're learning nothing. You really aren't learning anything. Gradual test. He should have boxed Lyndon Arthur before he boxed Kovalev. He should have boxed guys like that. You know what I mean? Ricky Summers, there's all these kind of guys, like, box guys like gradual step-ups, and then, and then Craig Richard, for instance, and then move on, and then, get past that level, then go on to European level, then go on to world level. But do it that way. Don't just easy touch, chuck us in. Do you know what I mean? You got to be clever with it.
Final thing on all things Daniel Dubois. I saw the BT guys come down to the gym and you were showing off some of your injuries and your war wounds over the years. How are you getting on? How's your elbows, your shoulders, your neck, everything? Well, you've been due an MOT or two lately. Yeah,
it's all right, mate. It is what it is, isn't it? It's just life, mate. I don't like the paddles. I like to feel the shots, but I need my assistant to start doing a bit more work and maybe chucking them on the bags. But everyone loves the pads. I mean, everyone loves hitting the pads, and I feel like I can teach them more when they're on the pads. So it's all right. Hopefully, I get well paid.
Josh Pritchard ever taken Daniel Dubois on the pads?
He took him on the shield the other day, but no, not on the pad.
Interesting.
He'd be like this, punching down on him.